counseling. Counseling can be very helpful when it comes on to the repair of your relationship and the sustenance of your relationship. But a lot of us don't really feel it's necessary. And so a lot of us have behaviors in our marriages that make it really difficult for the marriage to stand the test of time. Vulnerability is pretty scary because the last thing any of us want is for our stuff to be used against us. If a couples counselor wants to be effective in helping a couple to stay together, they have to remain unbiased. A bad counselor will allow it to show in their body language, on their faces. A good counselor will maintain a positive demeanor toward their counselee. Yo, welcome back to another episode of the worst relationship advice ever. You definitely should not listen to me. Bear rubbish me a chat, you see me? And today we'll be discussing the idea of counseling. How many of you have been to counseling? I know I've been to counseling. Yeah, I'm a very big proponent of counseling and a beneficiary of counseling. And I have studied counseling psychology. And I have also been a counselor. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have counseled a wide range of people and couples, but I've done a little here and there. If I think back, in my college days, I was a camp counselor. Yeah, to teenagers. I would go to New Generation Camp in the summer to be a counselor to the young people. And of course, the counseling I'm speaking about today is not so much camp counseling. That's a different type of setting, but more so the type of counseling you do with like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you know, to sit down in their office and talk through your feelings and your fears and your ambitions and some of the emotional troubles or problems that you may be facing. Do you go to counseling? Counseling can be very helpful when it comes on to the repair of your relationship and the sustenance of your relationship. But a lot of us don't really feel it's necessary. And I get it. I understand. Especially for those of us who are adults and we're intelligent, we believe that we should be able to figure out the issues on our own. I mean, it's not rocket science. But there are elements to us as human beings that go much deeper than what the surface problem might present. For example, trust issue, like where you have a woman who she hears from her husband that he is going to fill her gas tank, right? However, before he gets a chance to go fill the gas tank, she goes and does it herself. Now, this may cause a bit of conflict because he was planning to go do this courtesy for her, and she goes off and does it herself. And then she may be complaining that he never does anything chivalrous for her or never does the courtesy of being a gentleman to her, you know, doing stuff like opening doors or putting gas in her car or, you know, paying for meals or whatever. She might complain about that. Now, he's trying to do better, but she would have overstepped and did what he had promised to do in his stead and is now complaining about it. To the man, she probably seems very unreasonable, probably seems very cantankerous, probably seems difficult to get along with. But why is that? There's a reason behind that. And counseling can help a person to identify what their behavior is saying about them, or what their behavior is saying about their past. Something would have happened in the past to influence how we behave today. And so a lot of us have behaviors in our marriages that make it really difficult for the marriage to stand the test of time. We want to be loving and caring, and we want to be loved and cared for. However, our attitudes and our behaviors do not create an environment for which love and care to thrive. And we often don't notice it. We don't see ourselves. I don't know if you've ever heard of a thing called the Johari window. Yeah, I learned about it a couple years back when I was a programs facilitator at the YWCA. And the Johari window is where we are all made up of 4 selves. You have the public self, which is the self that everybody else knows and we know. You have the private self, where we know that self, but nobody else doesn't know that self. There is the blind self, where other people observe that about us, but we don't observe it about ourselves. And then you have the unknown self, which we don't know and nobody else knows, but it's there, just waiting to come to the surface at some point in time. And so these 4 selves make up all of us. As a part of the reason why we can never really get to know a person through and through. Some people would argue that you should get to know a person before you choose to marry. As they look at a person who is getting married quickly and think that they're crazy because they haven't gotten to know the person well enough to know whether or not this is the right person for them to get married to. Well, the truth is, we never really know a person. You can go out on 50 dates with a person, dinner, movies, events, activities. You can go on all these dates and think you know a person, and then you come to live with them for the first time and recognize that there are elements of this person's personality that you never knew about. You never knew how untidy they were or how neat they were. You never knew how they like to use a toothpaste. You never know how they leave the shower when they step out. You never know that they didn't like to fold clothes or that they fold clothes very neatly. You never knew that they hate mixing the wooden clothespins with the plastic clothespins. Right? The elements of a person that you just cannot know no matter how long you date. And even after you marry, you're gonna be spending the rest of your life still getting to know this person. And as this person has new experiences and reads new books and comes into new revelations, they're gonna change. And now you're gonna get to know a new element of this person. And so, just because you see the public self or the blind self, that doesn't mean you know the unknown self or the private self. When it comes down to the private self, we are the ones who are in charge of revealing our private self to our partner. We know this about ourselves, but nobody else knows. And we now have to reveal that intentionally to somebody else. And there are elements of ourselves that we're not so proud of. We don't necessarily want to reveal, but it is necessary for the fostering of intimacy. Of course, many of us come into marriage not knowing how to foster intimacy. We don't know the value of vulnerability. And vulnerability is pretty scary because the last thing any of us want is for our stuff to be used against us. We would not want our vulnerability to be turned back on us by our spouse. And so, a lot of relationships are struggling and suffering because of a lack of intimacy, and the intimacy is as a result of a lack of vulnerability. And many of you would not have known that if you did not go to counseling or if you didn't just hear me say it on the podcast. Counseling is very powerful. There's a lot that can be learned from a counselor. However, not every counselor is built the same. Not every counselor is effective in what they do. How can you determine whether or not a counselor that you are going to is a good counselor or a bad counselor? You probably would want to ask some friends for referrals to say, hey, who would you refer me to as a counselor? You'd probably want to interview counselors to get an understanding of what they do, how they go about doing their practice, and whether or not they're effective. In my opinion, there are some ways in which you can identify a good counselor. For one, a good counselor is someone who is confidential, who knows how to keep confidentiality. That's number one when it comes on to being a good counselor. Because for us to offload what is on our hearts and what is on our chest to our counselor, we have to know that this information is not going to be revealed to anybody else. Now, of course, most counselors will communicate up front that if there is anything that is shared that could be a criminal offense or may be indicating a tendency towards suicide, then they are obligated to share such information with the necessary authorities. And so, unless you are sharing something that is a crime or you're intending to kill yourself, then more than likely your counselor will not share anything with anybody. And so that creates the safety for you to open up to your counselor. The second trait of a very good counselor is one who listens. Yeah. You want to feel as if your counselor is listening to what you have to say.
Linda, listen, Linda.
You are feeling engaged even though they aren't saying much. So they're giving you the eye contact. They're probably asking probing questions based on what you said. Or they're asking for clarification of what you just said. That's an indicator of a counselor that is listening to what you're saying. Because some people may have it a bit twisted. But a counselor isn't there to tell you how to live or tell you what to do. Rather, a good counselor is there to guide you through your own thoughts to your own solution. Yeah. A good counselor will help you to come up with your own solution to your own problems, just by strategically using questions to allow you to think as critically as possible. Yeah? And so that is how we ought to counsel. Now, probably some people would appreciate a counselor that gives more instructions and that tells us what to do. But that oftentimes can backfire, because sometimes the advice of a counselor does not work out in the favor of the counselee. And then now the counselee will come back and probably chastise the counselor for giving bad advice. And so, unless a counselee is asking and beseeching a counselor for advice, I don't believe a counselor should be giving too much advice. So yes, confidentiality, listening is your second basic trait. The third very important trait is the giving of unconditional positive regard. That's a term that was coined by psychologist Carl Rogers. And so what that means is that no matter what the person in front of the counselor is saying, the counselor is maintaining a positive and welcoming demeanor. Because I tell you, there are some pretty interesting people on this planet who have amazing stories, pretty detrimental and disastrous stories as well, violent stories. People may be sharing about something that they did in the past that was very vile, very evil. The counselor may have the temptation to think to themselves that this person is deserving of jail, or this person is deserving of the death penalty, or this person is deserving of revenge upon them. Even if that thought crossed the mind for a moment, a bad counselor will allow it to show in their body language, on their faces. A good counselor will maintain a positive demeanor toward their counselee, to maintain the fact that this is a safe place and that we are here to help, not to condemn, not to belittle, not to look down upon, but to help. And so it is very important that a counselor be able to maintain an attitude of unconditional, positive regard toward their counselee. That spills over into the fourth thing, which is unbiased. And I would say this is more so in the realm of couples counseling. So everything I just shared a while ago is about individual counseling an individual. This fourth trait is also important for individual, but more so for couples counseling. You want a counselor who is unbiased. And that is why most couples are encouraged to seek out a counselor who is neutral to both of them. So the wife shouldn't be seeking someone who she is familiar with, someone who she's friends with to counsel them. Or the husband shouldn't be seeking somebody who he's familiar with or friends with to counsel he and his wife, because there may be a bias involved. And that bias can be pretty detrimental. I can say I sensed bias in my situation with my counselor between me and my ex-wife. And so that would have kind of contributed to the whole breakdown that happened between me and my ex-wife. Because as much as what I did was wrong, there was not wrong only on my side. It always takes two to tango. It always takes two for a relationship to fail. And so if a couples counselor wants to be effective in helping a couple to stay together, they have to remain unbiased so that they can help each individual identify and take responsibility for their role in the breakdown of their relationship. The temptation is to try and focus on one person before focusing on the other. But that could easily backfire if the other person is there waiting on their turn for the counselor's attention to switch to getting the other person to acknowledge their wrong. It should be unbiased from the start and throughout the entire process. In my opinion, that's the safest way. Otherwise, the one who is being blamed more than the other may get fed up and frustrated and just quit the whole process prematurely. If that happens, then the counselor would not have been effective in helping the couple to repair their broken union. And so in my opinion, those are the traits you're looking for in an effective counselor. Now, this is the worst relationship advice ever. I am not a fully trained counselor, but I have done some studies and I have counseled before. And so if any of you would like me to speak with you and your partner and help you to resolve conflict, help you to forgive, help you to move past offense, if you need a mediator for the resolution of your conflict, you can feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, my personal email address is darrensalmon24@gmail.com. Send me an email and I will definitely respond, and we can always organize how I could help you to resolve issues in your relationship. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Our next episode, we're going to talk a bit more about counseling and the male and female, perspective that many people hold where counseling is concerned. Some people think that we shouldn't need to go to counseling because I'm not crazy, I'm not mad, I'm not a psychopath, so I don't need counseling, or we don't need counseling. But I tell you, all of us who have been hurt in the past, who probably grew up without both our parents, who probably experienced some level of injustice, whether it be in the home or outside the home, while we're in school or while we're participating in some, organization. All of us need some amount of, untangling of our emotions and coming to a good understanding of who we are and why we do what we do and why we have the attitudes that we have and why we have the personalities that we have and how our personalities impact our relationships. All of us need a bit of that. Yeah? So yes, blessings to you and your family. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. See you next time. Later.